They came up with bogus straw men arguments against it, did politicking and story planting in the press, and I eventually realized that there was a rotten game going on.
Could you give a bit more about the motivation, why someone would want to be destructive of good news?
Well, they were very fearful. They realized that it was real and then tried to suppress it.
He died as soon as he began to speak. Back in 1989, the world came within inches of changing forever. A discovery so dangerous to those in power, it was buried the moment it appeared. When he started exposing what he had been warned never to reveal, it didn't take long before he was found murdered in Connecticut.
The first assault was by planting negative stories in the press, and people at MIT, I regret to say, were the first people to promote the idea that this was fraud.
We found a rare recording of his testimony. It was recorded on April 23, 1998. It's raw, unpolished, and unsettling. His words are too important to filter or reinterpret, so you hear them exactly as he said them. Listen carefully.
So there was a compulsion by the Secretary of Energy in the new Bush administration to get to the bottom of this. And so I had to tell the press what the status was, and I had to ask them. I had to find spokespeople. There became, I must say, one very positive person toward very quickly at MIT, whose name was Professor Peter Hagelstein in electrical engineering. Now, when he came out with that theory at MIT, there was hell to pay, and he has paid a very big price.
Back in 1989, the world came within inches of changing forever. A discovery so powerful, it was buried before it could spread. And today, we're facing a new kind of revolution. Only this time, it's in plain sight: artificial intelligence. Before we go deeper into this hidden story, a quick word from today's sponsor, Outskill, who are opening doors to a revolution of their own. This weekend, they're hosting a 2-day AI Mastermind workshop, live on Saturday and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. In just 16 hours, expert mentors will take you from beginner to pro, covering 10 plus powerful AI tools, prompt engineering, workflow automation, and even building apps and websites with zero code. Now here's the exciting part. The training normally costs $895, but I've partnered with Outskill to give away 1,000 free seats for 72 hours only. That's nearly $900,000 worth of training free for my viewers. It's rated 4.9 out of 5 on Trustpilot, and over 10 million people have already attended in the past year. You'll also get lifetime access to Outskill's private AI community of 5,000 plus professionals, a seamless learning dashboard for easy progress, and if you sign up now, you'll unlock $5,100 in exclusive bonuses. Day 1, the Prompt Bible with 3,000 plus prompts. Day 2, a roadmap to monetize AI, plus a personalized AI toolkit builder if you attend both days. Seats are limited and filling fast. Use the link in the description and join their WhatsApp community to stay updated. On March 23, 1989, the unthinkable happened. At the University of Utah, 2 respected chemists stood before cameras and announced they had split the atom, not in a reactor, but in a glass jar. Heavy water, palladium, and a trickle of current producing more energy than it consumed. If real, it meant infinite, clean power from ordinary water. For a brief moment, the world believed the future had arrived, but almost as quickly, the miracle of the century was branded the joke of the decade.
What happened was that on March 23, 1989, something caught us all by surprise. In the afternoon, there was an announcement by Drs. Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons at the University of Utah, stating that they had performed what appeared to be some type of nuclear process in a small vessel, jar, test tube, as it were, of heavy water with palladium. More heat was coming out, they said, than could possibly be accounted for by the electricity going in and any known chemical reactions.
Even when the laughter died down, one man refused to move on: Eugene Mallove, an engineer with degrees from MIT and Harvard. Unlike many of his colleagues, Mallove didn't dismiss the Utah team outright. He had seen too much to believe the story was over. And when internal data from MIT's own replication experiments crossed his desk, he noticed something disturbing. The early draft charts showed signs of excess heat in heavy water experiments, exactly what Pons and Fleischmann had claimed. But in the final version, the curves looked different. The upward trace of energy had been pushed downward, flattening out the evidence. To Mallove, it was not an accident. It was a deliberate adjustment designed to erase a positive signal. Mallove knew what he had seen, and by speaking out, he crossed a line few dared to cross. Years later, he would pay the ultimate price.
On July 10th, the data that was in the MIT draft report, as made by one individual on the team of 16, showed excess heat, on the graph at least, the semi-processed raw data, you might say. There it was. Excess heat in the heavy water experiment, no excess heat in the light water experiment. Now, and then there was text for that report, for that section of the report, the calorimetry part of the report, which they had very much de-emphasized because they weren't interested in that really. 3 days later, I had the comparison, what went into the final report, and which was published by the Journal of Fusion Energy and was widely touted, and the conclusion was in the DOE report. They had kept the light water experiment, the control experiment. They had done the appropriate time averaging in hour. They had averaged over each hour and made 1 point. That was okay. So what you saw in the control experiment case where there was no excess heat, you saw it get averaged, and you saw the curve, and you could overlay them, and this one could be, this new curve, which was to be published, you could see how it was legitimately the reflection of the earlier unaveraged raw data, okay? But in the case of the heavy water situation, these curves were utterly unlike one another. One had been radically shifted downward, and it turned out later that there was even worse than I thought. I thought they had just taken the whole data and just shifted it down, and I searched for a reason why that would have been done, and there was no reason. I did some detective work behind the scenes to find out if there was a legitimate reason. There was no legitimate reason, and there never has been and never will be. And furthermore, it has been analyzed by others in a more sophisticated way than the analysis I applied, and they found out that there was absolutely no way whatsoever of taking the data from the preliminary July 10th version and going to the July 13th version, which was 89, which was published, and ever coming up with that by what is called a linear transformation. It had to be highly manipulated. And in other fields, we would call that fraud. And I state that it was fraud.
This was no trivial slip. MIT's published report became one of the most influential documents used to discredit cold fusion around the world. According to Mallove, those altered graphs gave skeptics the ammunition they needed to declare the field dead. If the nation's top technical university couldn't reproduce the results, then clearly the whole thing was nonsense. Or so the narrative went. But Mallove insisted the truth was far messier. He called it what no one else dared to: fraud.
And furthermore, in the entire bigger picture, forgetting now for the moment just that curve shifting, which is fraud, okay? The big picture is that they used their conclusions, which were totally inappropriate, to continue the charade to 1998 and onward, that there's nothing to cold fusion. The big university MIT and its experts concluded that it was nonsense. That's the worst fraud. But if someone wants to get the real smoking gun and say, did they ever do an experiment that looked like it might be promising, they were duty-bound to publish that experiment and say if they wanted, okay, here are the error bars that show the errors we might have made there. And so we look at that curve and we say that it really doesn't prove what Pons and Fleischmann was doing. In fact, they also wrote in the language there, and they changed the language from July 10th through July 13th and showed that they were matching their negative conclusion to the shifting of the data. I would not have objected if they had just showed the data and said, we don't think that means it's cold fusion, and it's not. But I think most people would then have looked at the data and would have said, how can you say there's nothing here? You've only done one experiment for 80 hours in a comparison test. You better go back and do that again. The lower echelon fellow at MIT, under no circumstances, would have presented to his boss, Ronald Parker, the shocking news that MIT was going to be forced to present a nominally positive result. He just couldn't do it. He couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't have the integrity to do it. Had he the integrity to do it, the whole story would have been different.
They massaged the data, and in doing so, they rewrote history. But the graphs were only the beginning. What started in the basement of one university was about to reach the halls of government, where the final blow would be struck. By the summer of 1989, the excitement that once surrounded cold fusion had turned into a firestorm of controversy. The U.S. Department of Energy stepped in, forming a special panel of experts to give an official verdict. Scientists across the world waited anxiously. If the panel found the claims credible, billions could be redirected into a new line of research that promised unlimited energy. But if they ruled against it, the story would be over before it truly began. And the result came swiftly. By July, just a few short months after the Utah press conference, the panel declared there was insufficient evidence to support cold fusion. It was a death sentence written in bureaucratic language. With that single decision, government funding dried up. Universities that had been curious shut their doors. Promising researchers abandoned the field, fearing the label of pseudoscience. Patents tied to cold fusion were quietly rejected or stalled in the system. Those who dared to believe suddenly found themselves blacklisted, ridiculed, and without resources. For the establishment, it was easier to declare the matter finished than to risk undermining existing programs in hot fusion, which already commanded billions in funding, or to threaten the global energy economy built on oil.
We are not talking about a small issue here. This is not whether some obscure theory is right or wrong, and then this group is right and that group was wrong about how to theorize about something. This is the very lifeblood of civilization. This is energy. Thousands of children die every week or every day because they do not have clean water. And these small, compact energy sources, just as an example, could save their lives, okay? And we do not have that now. If the government had done the right thing and had at least been neutral about this, and had, instead of MIT hot fusioneers and propagandists, if they had not insisted on killing it to save their own funding, and they make large salaries. One in particular, they're the head of the hot fusion lab at the time. He now makes $500,000 a year, his house allowance plus his very high salary. What would have happened is that science would have proceeded in a reasonable way.
Now, it wasn't about the truth anymore. It was about protecting billion-dollar hot fusion budgets, political prestige, and the profits of fossil fuel empires. And when so much money and power are at stake, the knives always come out. But the real tragedy wasn't in Washington. It was in the world outside the lab. Mallove said what was buried in 1989 could have saved countless lives had it been pursued with honesty and urgency. Imagine small, affordable power units bringing electricity to villages with no grid, purifying drinking water where children die daily from contamination, and replacing the burning of fossil fuels that choke the atmosphere. According to Mallove, this wasn't just a scientific controversy, it was a lost opportunity that stretched across decades. Instead of developing a clean, virtually limitless energy source, humanity stayed locked in the same cycle of oil dependence, pollution, and energy poverty. While governments funneled billions into hot fusion machines that still can't break even after half a century, cold fusion research was left to wither on the margins, dismissed as fantasy. Mallove believed that this delay cost millions of lives that could have been extended with cheap electricity, safe drinking water, and modern healthcare powered by abundant energy.
But frankly, the worst consequence for them, if they look themselves in the mirror, once all this technology is out and we're running, non-fossil fuel sources, non-conventional fission sources, they will have to look themselves in the face, in the mirror, and say, look what I did. I delayed a technology for many years. And that's why I think this is a very serious matter. This is not a game. This is not an academic exercise. This is life and death. And this is, above all, for the world, hope that was killed, or temporarily killed, in 1989. All right? The world needs a large dose of hope for many reasons. There's a lot of concern about the environment, and to have participated in a conspiracy, a public conspiracy, not a smoke-filled room conspiracy, a publicly acknowledged conspiracy, almost out in the open kind of conspiracy, to kill an idea, and not an idea, but a real technology, as we now see, as commercial developments are occurring, is a disgraceful thing. Millions of people, in effect, have needlessly died. We will never get back the 9 years or so, or however you want to rate it, when it should have been taken seriously. All that time is gone and will never come back again. So whenever these devices are developed and used, that period of time of delay, which is on the order of 9 years, you could argue maybe 7 years, it's gone and won't come back.
His words were blunt. Millions died because it was suppressed. Even if you don't fully accept his numbers, the scale of what might have been lost is impossible to ignore. He didn't just warn the world, he lived the consequences of exposing it. Not long after making these claims public, he was found murdered in Connecticut. Because if there was even a fraction of truth in those early experiments, then the suppression of cold fusion wasn't just a mistake. It was one of the greatest crimes against humanity ever committed. They thought the verdict was final, but the truth has a way of clawing back from the grave, and in hidden labs across the world, the silence began to crack. Even after the US government and major universities declared cold fusion dead, not everyone walked away. In Japan, Italy, and a handful of smaller labs across the world, researchers quietly kept experimenting. They reported flashes of strange results, bursts of excess heat, unexplained energy outputs, and in some cases, signs of actual nuclear changes happening inside their devices. These were not the headlines of 1989, but scattered reports that suggested something important was still hiding in the data. One of the most intriguing threads came from Japan. At Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, a physicist named Yoshiaki Iwamura and his team pushed deuterium through palladium layered with other metals. To their surprise, they claimed to see elements shift, atoms apparently transforming into new elements. To mainstream science, it sounded impossible. But the experiments were repeated and observed, showing consistent patterns that demanded attention. These results hinted at processes that classical physics could not yet explain. In 2004, the Department of Energy revisited the subject. The official line was still skeptical, but this time the report acknowledged that there were anomalies worth testing. It was not an endorsement, but it was a crack in the wall that had been built in 1989.
Has already been exhibited in their experiments to evolve more than 1,000 times the chemical energy if you just burn that hydrogen. So even though today conventional hydrogen energy is the good thing, you have to make it somehow with energy. But what Randall Mills is saying at the Blacklight Power Corporation is that if we use this process that they've developed and patented in Australia, we can get 1,000 times the energy out of ordinary hydrogen, which means fill up your car with a tank full of water, 20 gallons of water or so, drive a 200 horsepower car, as he stated in our magazine, drive it at 60 miles an hour, 100,000 miles. That's what one tank full of water will do, according to his modest theory. According to cold fusion theory, a relatively smaller amount of water, not even a 20-gallon tank, appropriate kind of water and what have you, might drive the car millions of miles. So we're talking about a powerful agent of change here.
1989 was the year hope was buried, sealed away under ridicule and denial. Yet truth has a strange way of resurfacing, even when the world tries to drown it. Cold fusion remains a shadow on the edge of science, a possibility that refuses to die. So ask yourself, what if the future didn't fail, but was pushed aside? And what happens when it finally pushes back?